History on Blast, episode 29, Journey to the Center of the Earth. On today's episode, we're putting John Quincy Adams on blast for having an extremely questionable approach to the concept of science, even for the early 1800s. But first, this month in history. July 4th is known for many things in the United States, not the least of which is as the nation's birthday. But did you know that 3 of the first 5 presidents met their fate on July 4th? In fact, John Adams and Thomas Jefferson died on the same day, July 4th, 1826, exactly 50 years after the birth of the United States. 5 years later, in 1831, the 5th president, James Monroe, followed them. Many people took the third such death of a founding father on July 4th as a sign of divine providence. Regarding the event, the Boston Traveler newspaper is quoted as saying, "Again, our divine anniversary has been marked by one of those events, which it may be scarcely permitted to ascribe the chance." On the flip side of things, only one president was ever born on the 4th of July, Calvin Coolidge.
Hello, listeners. I'm Kay, a musical theater nerd.
And I'm Warren. I'm musically challenged.
We host a podcast every Wednesday called Tone Deaf, a theater nerd's guide for their musically challenged spouse. Join us as I introduce Warren to musicals he's never seen and test his knowledge about musical theater.
You have to have knowledge before you can be tested.
Well, you've come a long way, Warren. Now you know that Andrew Lloyd Webber created Cats and not West Side Story.
Is that the show with the Cobras?
And we still have a ways to go.
Join us every Wednesday for Tone Deaf.
Okay, so before I go and completely dunk on John Quincy Adams, I need to provide a little background in the form of a quick explanation of Hollow Earth theory. This doctrine, shall we call it, was proposed in the late 17th century and disproven by 1774. Now, given that I'm sure you all remember that John Quincy Adams was a president of the United States, the fact that it was disproven before there was a United States is probably a thing to note here. So just jot that down and we'll continue along. So, it starts out being proposed by my boy Edmund Halley in the late 17th century, and the basic idea is that the Earth is not, as we know it, a big rock with some magma in the middle and some, geological layers. There's strata, there's, magma and crusts and stuff. I learned this in 9th grade, and I'll be real with you, I don't super remember all of it, so I don't really expect that you do either. But I'll tell you what's not in the middle of the Earth, and that would be, concentric hollow spheres that things can live on that are 1,500 miles apart-ish, with big holes at the North and South Pole so that you could slip between the layers of sphere and go visit the mole men who live underground. Yup, you heard me right. Go visit the mole men. You may be most familiar with the concept of Hollow Earth theory from Jules Verne's Journey to the Center of the Earth, which is probably the only good thing that came out of this. It actually has a lot of basis in folklore because of things like the Greek concept of the underworld. Hades just is in the ground, which is why, Hades rules over all of the wealth in the earth along with the dead. It's a whole thing. There's also a lot of cultures that talk about the idea that the underworld or the land of the dead can be accessed through caves. you especially see that in a lot of South American traditions, or you'll also find that in Tibetan Buddhism. There's the idea of a subterranean realm known as Shambhala, which is inside the earth. So, folklore says totally cool, awesome, there's stuff inside the earth. In 1692, Edmund Halley went, I bet that's made of science. And everyone else kind of went, we have no reason to disbelieve that, I guess? And then some time passed, and, actual science happened, and they realized that no, the Earth has a giant core of magma, and not mole men. But in 1818, we have one John Cleves Sims Jr., who still believed. He believed. He ended up becoming one of the most well-known proponents of the Hollow Earth theory, because not only did he believed so hard that he went, hey, Congress, could I get some funding? And Congress kind of looked at him and went, what the fuck is wrong with you? Because remember, Hollow Earth theory was definitively disproved in 1774. This is 1818. But here we go. So, Congress says no. And what should happen but my boy John Quincy Adams, presidential hopeful, goes, hey, I'm running for president. I could get you your funding. And, well, he sure did. It became an important part of his presidential campaign, to the point that it actually convinced people that he stood for something. Because prior to this, people on the campaign trail were like, well, he doesn't really have a backbone, and he hasn't promised anything, so we're not really sure what he does. So now they're like, aha! He believes in sending a man to the center of the earth to make trade with the mole men. Yes, that was part of the plan, was that they were going to establish trade with the mole men. Alright. Okay. So, off we go here. As I'm sure you know, if you know, well, anything about history and science and things, you'll know that this expedition never happened, which is so sad. So very sad. Because can you imagine how cool it would have been? Because not only did they have to go to the North Pole, like all the way up in the Arctic, in order to even hypothetically find one of these holes they were convinced exists, but then they would have to go down into these theoretical caves that they think they're gonna find at the North Pole, where there is ice and water, my dudes. And even pretending they could find a cave to go in, I don't know what they would find. It would be like rock. Because as we all know, there are no mole men, which saddens me deeply. I wish there were. Do you know how cool it would be if we could say that in the 1820s we went to the center of the earth and we established trade with the mole men? But no, there are no mole men. And John Quincy Adams only served one term in office, so when he was replaced by Andrew Jackson, all of the funding for the venture was, reappropriated into something else. I will say, however, for John Quincy Adams' career as a president, he did manage to get the funding for the Naval Observatory in Washington, D.C., and he helped ensure that James Smithson's contributions to the country founded the Smithsonian Institution, which is great and awesome, but we just have to every so often stop and remind ourselves that this man wanted to send a dude into the center of the earth to find the mole men. I will say, though, he definitely gets some kind of award for the most creative appropriation of tax dollars in the history of the United States, because I don't think anyone else has ever wanted to do something quite so wacky or already disproven by science. And if there is, I really want to know what it was, because how do you beat this? That's just about gonna do it for this episode, though. As always, if you have any questions, comments, feedback, episode suggestions, anything at all, you can find me at History on Blast on Twitter, or you can email me at historyonblast@gmail.com.